Welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 6. Today, we're going to be talking about the pressure to be productive. But before we get into that, I want to take a quick second to acknowledge the bomb-ass sweatshirt that I'm wearing right now. Quite literally came in the mail an hour ago, just in time for us to shoot this, and I'm so excited that I get to wear it. I just restocked the entire website with all Comfort Colors products because I will live and die by Comfort Colors. Their fit, their wash is superior in my opinion. So if you want to get yourself a happy little strawberry guy, head over to our website. That is linked in the description down below. That being said, let's get into the topic of today. I posted a TikTok the other day, and I'm basically going to regurgitate it for you in case you didn't see it so you can understand where the root of this topic comes from. If my husband tells me that he's going to make me dinner and that he's going to take care of the dishes and that I can just sit on the couch and relax and do nothing, part of me will still feel compelled to get up and help him, or at the very least, to check in with him periodically to make sure that he didn't change his mind halfway through and that he's not feeling overwhelmed, that there's nothing that I could be doing to help him. So why is that? Why do we feel this way? Why do we have such a hard time relaxing, especially when someone else is in the room and they're doing something productive? Maybe they're even doing something for us. And the first thing that comes to mind is the idea of conditional love. In a healthy family dynamic, kids are loved unconditionally for who they are. They're given the space to develop their own personality, their individuality. They're encouraged to talk about how they're feeling and to set boundaries if something makes them feel uncomfortable. In a healthy family dynamic, kids don't ever fear losing that love or sense of security that they receive from their parents. And the difference when you're raised in a narcissistic family is that you're often praised more so for what you do instead of just who you are. And so the love a lot of times can feel more conditional. There's a lot of control when you're dealing with a narcissistic parent. And so kids aren't given the opportunity or the space to develop a lot of sides of their own personality or individuality. They aren't really encouraged to talk about their feelings. And I know for me, I didn't even know what boundaries were or that I could set them until I was in my early 20s after I had moved out of my parents' house. And I guess one of the biggest differences is that when you're talking about a narcissistic family, kids in that environment fear losing the love and the security that you typically receive from your parents. It can feel sometimes almost like the relationship is transactional, and if you don't give your part, then you're not going to receive anything in return. And they do this through guilt tripping, through the silent treatment. And the reason that I think this is so dangerous, especially when you're dealing with younger kids, is because kids learn through behavior. And so if what I'm feeling or what I choose to do doesn't align with what my narcissistic parent wants, then they have the ability and the power to take that love and that security and that admiration that as kids we crave from our parents away. And they do. And that's how they get you to go back and to do exactly what it is that they want you to do. And over time, you become conditioned to understand, okay, the way that I'm going to receive this love from my parents, the way that we're going to have a good relationship is when I anticipate what they want me to do or what they want me to say, how they want me to feel. And that's that. If I feel something that is maybe a bit truer to me, but I know that my parents aren't going to agree with it, it's better that I keep that to myself because I don't want my parents not to talk to me. I think getting out of that environment and starting to understand how manipulative narcissists can be, the silent treatment for me is one of the most shocking tactics that they use, that for a really long time, I never even questioned. I thought that it was kind of a normal thing that parents would do or that people in general would do if they were upset with somebody or if someone did something that they asked them not to do, to just completely detach and not speak. And now the thought of that, being with a kid, especially my own kid, them being upset and trying to apologize or communicate to me, and in return, as an adult, not even speaking to them, not looking to them, pretending like they're not in the room. I think that is one of the cruelest things that you can do as a parent in a family dynamic. And when this happens so frequently, especially when it starts at a really young age, it can start to feel very normal. I remember a lot of parts of my personality that I showed, or things that I did, things that I believed in, they weren't necessarily true to who I was, and I didn't realize that until I was in an environment safe enough to express those things and to kind of uncover all of these parts of my personality. And so I think I made a lot of those decisions kind of subconsciously, where you're just kind of conditioned over time to learn, okay, like this is the right kind of behavior. And once you understand that, I don't even think you consciously make these decisions moving forward always, where it's like, oh, okay, I'm encountering a new situation and, well, this is how I really feel about it, but this is how I know my parents would want me to feel, so I'm going to go with this one. You just kind of immediately adopt that feeling that you know your parents are going to better receive. And the more practice you have at this, the better you get, and the more seamless it kind of fits into your life, which again is such a dangerous thing, especially when you're dealing with young kids. And the result of that is you don't develop so many parts of your own personality, of your own individuality. You never really step into that role of being your own person. I know for the longest time, I viewed myself solely as an extension of my parents. I was their kid before I was my own autonomous human being. And having that realization that I am my own person, and that means that I can say and do and feel whatever I want, was pretty mind-blowing, especially when you have that realization in your early 20s. And so instead of developing different sides of yourself and kind of getting to know yourself and exploring your thoughts and ideas and emotions, instead, what happens so often in these narcissistic families is the kid will always be on lookout for what they anticipate their parent wants. What does my parent want from me today? And that can change daily, and that varies based on every family. And so you're kind of entering into this state of hyper-awareness and hyper-vigilance, where you're always kind of on the edge of your seat and trying to predict what you can say or do or how you can act that's going to be best received by your parents, so that your life is as easy as it can possibly be. You minimize the tension, you minimize the stress, you don't add to any of the confrontation that's already present in the household. And so when you start to realize that the way for you to receive love and praise and validation from your parents, the way for your relationship with them to be the best that it can be, is for you to do as often as you possibly can what they want you to do. And that brings me to the term productionism. Now, that was a word that I first was introduced to when I read The Science of Stuck by Britt Frank. And basically, it's a compulsive need to produce. And I interpreted this in a very broad sense, because it's often talked about how the people surrounding the narcissist supply them with things, whatever that might be. And this is kind of in the same vein, in my opinion, where you as a child in a narcissistic family are producing something for your narcissistic parent. And when you do that is when you're in good standing. And whatever that might be, whether it's your time, your attention, your energy, whether you're someone to vent to, whether you're expected to help with physical chores, whether you are producing for the narcissist a defense in an argument, you're someone that's agreeable for them. This can take on so many forms. I know I was expected to engage in a lot of arguments from the time I was really young. I'm talking, 10, 11, 12 years old. And the subject matter of these arguments were far beyond the maturity level of, a 10, 11, 12-year-old. These were topics that I shouldn't have had to shoulder, things that I shouldn't have even been aware of or had to think about. They were kind of far beyond my capabilities in terms of what I was emotionally mature enough to handle and also what I could actually do about it. When you're talking about financial concerns and a marital relationship, these are all things that an 11-year-old has no clue about. Like, I am not even there yet. I'm worried about my math test on Monday. And yet you're looked to as someone the narcissist can vent to, they can get support and solutions from. And it's so exhausting not only to be so hyper aware all the time of what you think your parent wants, but then also sometimes to be expected to directly engage in stressful arguments about stressful topics that you can do nothing about. You cannot solve these problems, and yet you're expected to offer some kind of solution. The story that comes to mind when I think about conditional love takes place back in high school. When I was in high school, that was when I found my first real group of friends. And back in elementary school, I wasn't really given the opportunity to hang out with kids outside of school. I never really developed that camaraderie with my peers. I didn't have a real solid group of friends. And so it wasn't until I was probably in my sophomore year of high school that I first felt like I found a group of people that I fit in with. They liked my company. We got along really well. And that was such an awesome feeling. And I think it was multiplied just kind of having come from the experience that I had in elementary school. I think I valued it that much more. So that being said, I'm sitting at home on a Friday night, and my parents and I had just finished eating dinner, and we're about to sit down and watch a show together. Now, for whatever reason, my presence while watching these shows was so important to my parents. And I have a theory about this that surrounds the idea of a surrogate spouse, but we will get into that in another episode because that is a topic on its own. But for whatever reason, my siblings being present was never as important as me being there. And, I liked watching the shows. I will give them that. But it was never really like the end all be all for me. If I missed one here or there, it was okay. I'll catch up on it later. So we're sitting down after dinner, and just as we're about to start this episode, I get a text from my friends that says, "Hey, come outside." Now, initially, I'm so excited because I'm like, wow, okay, cool. Like, my friends are surprising me outside on a Friday night. This is so cool. Like, this has never happened to me before. I'm stoked. But immediately it's followed by that kind of sinking feeling in your stomach, and you're just kind of like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Now I have to tell this to my parents, and I have to ask them if I can go and hang out with my friends for a couple of hours. Now, this was a completely spontaneous hangout. It was one of those boring Friday nights where there's nothing to do and someone just starts driving around and one by one just kind of picks everyone up. And I was the farthest one downtown. So by the time they had gotten to me, my entire friend group was in the car, which is awesome. And the tricky part about anything spontaneous when you're dealing with narcissistic parents or controlling parents in general is that now you're on the spot. The clock is ticking. I've got a car full of people double parked outside waiting on me. And now I have to bring this up. I have to convince them that it's okay to let me go. And I have to face whatever wrath they decide to kind of dish out to me. So sure enough, I bring it up to my parents and I tell them like, hey, my friends are outside. I had no idea that they were coming by, but they surprised me and I would like to go with them. And sure enough, it led to an argument. And I leave the house in tears, and I did my best to enjoy the time that I spent with my friends that night, and I did. But all the while, I was getting a barrage of text messages, just things to make me feel bad, how disappointed they were that I actually left. And it can be so hard to just be in the moment and be having fun when this is all going on behind the scenes. And it makes me think about conditional love because, everything else was probably fine that day. We had a good day. We ate dinner together. We were about to sit down and watch a show. I was in good standing. And then, as soon as I did something that my narcissistic parent didn't want me to do, all of those good feelings were taken away. There was no love, there was no empathy, there was no understanding. I became the enemy. And why? Why would my parents not want me to go and hang out with my friends for a couple hours on a Friday night after I had gotten all of my homework done? I didn't have any responsibilities to take care of. And the only thing that comes to mind is that me going to hang out with my friends would not make me available to my parents. And they didn't want that. And so all of a sudden, that became an issue. And so I remember going out and I was getting text messages, but I was enjoying myself as much as I could. And then I came home to be met with the silent treatment. And so I feel bad because I'm apologizing. And in truth, I'm apologizing even though I didn't really do anything wrong. And instead of having any kind of a conversation about it or an open dialogue, quite literally met with the silent treatment. No words, not even acknowledging my presence in the room. And that can be so hurtful because all you want to do is make your parents happy and to have a good relationship with them. And when you do everything that you can to make sure that that happens 9 times out of 10, and then one time you fight to prioritize yourself and to do the thing that you want to do, even though you know your parents don't want you to. And that's what you're met with. It makes you feel like everything that you had done up until that point couldn't matter any less. And the same thing happened after I moved out of my parents' house. When, I didn't do anything malicious. There was nothing, I didn't do anything wrong besides, in their opinion, leave. I didn't want to deal with the toxic behavior anymore. I was finally prioritizing myself, putting myself first. And the result of that, me removing myself from that environment, meant that I was no longer available to my parents. I was no longer someone that they could vent to or they could pull into the middle of an argument. I couldn't give them solutions for problems that I didn't cause and I couldn't fix. And because of all that, the 20 years that I had given to them and that I had existed as an extension of them were gone in an instant. And that, to me, is a textbook example of conditional love, where you don't feel loved for just who you are, no matter what you say or the decisions that you make, whatever you feel is right for you at the time. It's entirely conditional. It's entirely based on what can I do for you? And if I stop doing something for you, then I will stop receiving that love. And so bringing it back to that initial topic and that initial question, why can't we relax when our partner is doing something productive, especially if it's something nice for us? And the reason I think for that is because when you grow up in an environment like this, where you feel that you will only receive love if you earn it, if you produce something of value for the other person, it can be so easy to carry that with you into a relationship with a romantic partner, where you find yourself kind of sitting on the edge of your seat, trying to assume what your partner might want or need from you that they may not directly communicate, and to do those things. And sometimes, even if they tell you directly, I don't want you to help with dinner, I've got the dishes, don't worry about it, there's still that fear that if something changes halfway through, they may not communicate that to you directly. And at the end of it all, when they come and sit down and dinner is done and the dishes are done, they're going to be mad at you or they're going to resent you for it because it was your job, right, to just pick up on this change of mood or tone or behavior on their part and to check in with them and for you to kind of be responsible for picking up on their emotions, even if they don't directly communicate that. And that's something that we can grow so used to when you grow up in a narcissistic family. And so you're always kind of on edge and you're always aware and you're doing your best to just kind of guess what you can do, how you can be of service to make sure that things go as smoothly as possible so that you remain in good standing with your partner. This is kind of made more difficult because for so many years of our lives, we weren't really given the opportunity to develop a lot of the sides of our personality, to kind of develop that sense of independence. And so you feeling restless and maybe a little overwhelmed. I saw a lot of comments of people describing it as kind of like a skin crawling feeling that you just can't sit still. When you've existed like that for so long, that's a hard thing to just let go of, especially when you don't have a lot of the sides of yourself or that sense of independence to help you to shake those things. I know for me, sometimes I feel like I don't want to sit and relax or maybe do something that I want to do. I don't want to get too far into it because I know that I might just have to stop it at any moment and help my partner. And that's not the case in my current relationship, but that was absolutely the case for me growing up, where I felt like whatever I was doing was secondary to whatever my parents needed from me, whether it was getting involved in an argument or helping with some task around the house or driving a sibling somewhere, whatever it was, whatever they needed from me, that was my main responsibility. And it didn't matter what I was doing myself. And I think that's one of the most exhausting parts of growing up in a narcissistic family is this constant state of hypervigilance. And it's one of the hardest things to let go of in other relationships in your life because it really permeates so many different aspects of your day-to-day and your way of thinking that it can feel entirely consuming. And that constant state of hypervigilance so often, I think, leads children of narcissistic parents or even people who have been in relationships, romantic relationships with narcissists, they lead them to develop this willingness or tendency or ability, I guess, to prioritize the wants and needs and emotions of someone else, even at the expense of their own. You develop this out of almost self-preservation because you know that, okay, I can handle whatever it is that's going on, right? I can push it down and sort of just tuck it away. But I know that if I don't help my narcissistic parent deal with their emotions, then maybe there's going to be a huge outburst. There's going to be consequences for everyone in the house. The mood is going to change. It's going to be down. And so it's my responsibility to take on those emotions and to kind of diffuse them as much as I possibly can, as quickly as I can. And that applies to all aspects of life where you know, okay, if my narcissistic parent asks me to do something, even if I have plans or something that I want to do, I'm going to say yes because I want to avoid the emotional outbursts. I want to avoid the control, whatever it might be. And so this can kind of become a habit. And it begs the question, what do we do about this? How do we let this go? And the first step, in my opinion, when it comes to any kind of healing from trauma is self-awareness. I think you have to develop a certain level of self-awareness before you can really get anywhere. Because I existed in an environment where I was encountering things like gaslighting, triangulation, projection, sometimes on a daily basis, without ever knowing what they were or that they even existed. I thought it was completely normal. And it wasn't until I was in an environment safe enough to start to understand and express these things that I realized how unhealthy they were. That's when I started to do some research, and I was finally able to trace these things back and understand where they come from. And that has been so beneficial to me, giving these things a name and understanding that they're not just the way that I am. It's been so helpful in taking away their power, because I remember initially things like feeling insecure or overwhelmed or stressed or hyper aware, all of these more negative qualities that I think you can develop when you grow up in an environment as emotionally volatile as that. When you feel like those things are just intrinsic to who you are, it's just the way that I am. I'm an anxious person, or I get easily overwhelmed, and it gives these things so much more power because it makes you feel like you can't do anything about it. And realizing that these are actual things that were learned behaviors, they're a result of what happened to you. They're not just the way you are. And so if you learned these behaviors, you can unlearn them and teach yourself new, more beneficial behaviors moving forward. And so I think that is the first step, is a certain level of self-awareness, understanding what you've been through, how it's affected you, and how you plan to move forward. Once you've got that down or under control, or at least started, you can move on to communication. That's kind of step 2 in my mind, because the particular situation that we're talking about involves another person, a partner, someone getting up and being productive or doing something for you and you having a hard time relaxing. So there's another person involved in this equation. So once you have this self-awareness and you kind of understand what these things are and where they came from, you've started to trace them back, you can communicate this to your partner and you can tell them, okay, listen, first of all, I can finally communicate my feelings directly because I'm encouraged to do so. I'm in an environment that's safe enough to do so. And even if my emotions or my feelings differ from that of my partner, that's okay. I'm not going to get punished. I'm not going to get the silent treatment or guilt tripped. We can have an open and honest dialogue. That is the first freeing part of direct communication and a safe partner. And so once you have that open line of communication, you can start to tell your partner all of these things that you've figured out about yourself. Okay, I feel like I have a hard time relaxing and sitting down when you're doing something nice for me. And the reason for that is because I grew up in an environment where I felt like I would only be in good standing with my partner or my parent when I was doing things for them, when I was constantly producing or anticipating their needs before my own. And that's a really hard thing for me to let go of. So maybe when you're doing dinner and you're doing the dishes, just reassure me a couple times that, you're still doing well, you don't need my help, and that you're happy that I'm relaxing, right? And assure me that, listen, if you change your mind halfway through, you're not going to rely on me to pick up on some change in your mood and ask you what's going on and to just kind of assume and get up and start helping you. You'll communicate that with me directly. And you'll say, hey, you know what? I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed now. Would you mind maybe coming and helping me with the dishes? I would really appreciate it. Knowing that if they change their mind, they will tell you that directly gives you so much peace of mind. I promise you. And from there, I think also one last thing that I would like to throw in with communication, which is true in my case also, is when you start to talk about these things with your partner after you've started to understand them yourself, you can gain perspective. And I think having outside perspective after growing up with narcissistic or controlling parents in general is so incredibly beneficial, because you can almost lose sight of the outside world for a time and you forget that not everyone exists the way that your family exists. Getting that outside perspective is so reassuring and refreshing, and it gives you a lot of hope moving forward, knowing that you can now create whatever kind of life you want for yourself, because the way that you grew up is not the way that you have to live the rest of your life. And so communication is hugely, hugely important. And I think the last step in this process is practice. The only way, these things are going to feel weird in the beginning. I remember after moving out of my parents' house, the peace of mind, the calm, it almost felt a little unnerving, like it was too good to be true or like a trick. And you're just kind of waiting for something to go wrong, for something to happen, and then there's going to be a big blow up, and what's it going to be? It's hard to kind of come to terms with the fact that you can go extended periods of time without any huge emotional outbursts or massive arguments or really bad, hurtful feelings. You become so used to these behaviors, you've kind of practiced these things for so long that you have to now do the opposite for those things to start to feel normal, if that makes sense. If you don't want to feel like you have to get up and help your partner when they tell you, hey, sit down and relax, the only way that those things are going to start to feel like they're coming to you more naturally is by doing them once and twice and again and again and again. And when you think about it, when you are raised in a narcissistic family, that takes place during so many, let's even just say until the time you're 18, right? When you're considered an adult and maybe you move out. For almost 2 decades of your life. And those 2 decades are home to some of the most developmental years of your life. So when you break out of that, not only are you still kind of in the habit of that behavior, right? And maybe you're just starting to unlearn some of these patterns, but you've grown so used to them that the only way for these things, these new behaviors to start to feel more natural to you is to get distance from that time, right? You've done this thing for so long that it feels normal. And so now you have to start to do this other thing over and over and over again. And the more you practice at it, the more normal it'll start to feel. And I think another way to maybe practice this, which I actually saw on Reddit, someone was saying that they have a really hard time just sitting down and doing nothing, even after they've gotten all their work done and, there's nothing else, they've cleaned the house. They frame downtime and relaxation and kind of just like a chunk of time where you do nothing as a chore. Because at the end of the day, relaxing and unwinding and giving yourself a little bit of time and space to just be and to not do anything productive is beneficial to your mental health and to how you're feeling overall. That in and of itself is a productive thing to do. And so if you're used to always doing things, frame that in your mind as a chore, because then maybe it'll be a little bit easier for you to kind of sit in that and to feel like, okay, I may not actually be doing something or anything at all, but in a way I'm doing something that's really productive. So I think maybe framing it in a particular way can make it feel a little bit easier for you to lean into that role. And so I think self-awareness, communication, and practice, these are all things that can really help us to unlearn a lot of these behaviors and to maybe feel a little bit more relaxed in our day-to-day life and to let go of some of that hypervigilance that we hold on to and to not project that onto our partner. And I think, again, through all of this, it's really important to just be patient with yourself, because growing up in that kind of a volatile environment does do a lot of damage. And it's a journey to kind of unlearn all of those things and to just feel normal again. So be patient with yourself, but be consistent with your practice. And remember that it's entirely worth it, because life on the other side, life outside of that headspace is so freeing and it's so wonderful. And you are far from alone in your healing journey. I promise you that. I'm going to be answering some of your comments over on Patreon and my TikTok series. That's a new feature that I'm just kind of getting into. So if you're interested in seeing that, head over to Patreon. The response that I've been getting from these videos and these TikToks, the community that has kind of come to light as a result of all of this has been so eye-opening to me that I feel like keeping this conversation going is so important. And especially having been raised the way that I was, struggling with the things that I have and starting to learn all of these things about myself and ways to get better, I feel so passionate about sharing as much as I possibly can with you that I'm doing my best to kind of transition this to be the thing that I'm doing sort of full time. I'm a woodworker. I have not taken an order in over a month. I have been dedicating every single day to this because I believe in it that much. And so if any of my videos have been helpful to you or my story is resonating with you at all, a really great way to support me is to head over to Patreon, to head over to TikTok series, pick up one of these little strawberry guys if you like it, and to just keep engaging, even here on YouTube. If you could subscribe to my channel or comment, any little thing helps, and I really appreciate it. So that's about all the time that I've got for this episode, but I will be getting into some of your comments over on Patreon and TikTok series. So if you'd like to see that, head over there now. I'll be back very soon with episode 7 of It's Not Normal, the podcast.